Kundro, a nondescript kind of man tested at a below-basic level and sentenced to remedial English. Like every other student caught in the wheels of education, he's scared, right down to the marrow of his bones. But it isn't attention that scares him. Those long, silent days of studying and the slow climb to reading proficiency, or even school itself. It's something else that holds Tim Kundro in the hot, sweaty grip of fear, something worse than any punishment this world has to offer, something found only in the testing zone.
You unlock this door with the key of standardization. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of true. A dimension of false. A dimension of none of the above. You're moving into a land of both bubbles and short answers, of reading and arithmetic. You just crossed over into the testing zone.
Standardized testing roots go back to 6th century China, where it was implemented as a means to test writing proficiency, arithmetic skills, and even music. However, in a modern context, standardized testing as we know it began with the Kansas Silent Reading Test, which was implemented in 1914. This was the earliest known published multiple-choice test developed by Frederick J. Kelly, a Kansas school director. Kelly created the test to reduce the time and effort in administration and scoring. Not long after, the SAT was founded in 1926 as the Scholastic Aptitude Test by the College Board. The original test lasted 90 minutes and consisted of 315 questions, testing knowledge of vocabulary and basic math. Many of the questions included the first application of fill-in-the-blank questions. This test grew and by 1930 assumed its now familiar form with separate verbal and math tests. By the end of World War II, the test was accepted by enough universities that it became the standard rite of passage for college-bound high school seniors. The test remained largely unchanged until the 2005 edition of a writing section. About a decade after the founding of the SAT, IBM hired Reynold B. Johnson to create a scoring machine. He succeeded, and in 1938 his invention, officially named the IBM 805, was officially marketed. It worked by detecting the electrical current flowing through pencil marks. Impressively, the IBM 805 was sold until 1963. The modern application of standardized testing began with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, enacted by President Lyndon B. Johnson in 1965. This bill was largely a reaction to the stunning success of Sputnik in 1957, which to many educators and politicians highlighted a failing education system. This bill, in essence, raised educational standards and attempted to make education more equitable, which could only be measured and enforced with standardized testing. Then, in 1983, Ronald Reagan's National Commission on Excellence in Education in essence warned of a crisis in American education and called for raising educational standards. It said that American education had, quote, lost sight of the basic purposes of schooling and of the high expectations and disciplined effort needed to attain them, end quote. This report rallied advocates to create stricter accountability measures, including increased testing overall.
The modern debate surrounding standardized tests stems from the No Child Left Behind Act. This act, co-authored by both Democrats and Republicans and signed into law by President Bush in 2002, ties standardized test scores directly to federal education aid. The basic premise of the act is that all government-run public schools that receive federal funding are required to take part in annually administered statewide standardized tests. In Pennsylvania, this test is known as both PSSA and Keystone exam, depending on what year of school students are in. The big measuring stick at play here is a concept called Adequate Yearly Progress, or AYP. This is a measure set by the state that is meant to determine if a school is improving sufficiently from year to year. This is also the measure that determines awards or consequences for a school. For example, if a school fails to meet AYP for 2 straight years, it earns an In Need of Improvement label from the government. 3 straight years of failure requires the school to offer free tutoring. 4 or more consecutive years of failing to meet the standard can mean widespread staff replacement, extended class hours, or a host of other repair measures. Other things required of schools by No Child Left Behind include making available highly qualified teachers to all students, as well as setting one high, challenging standard that is applied to all of the schools in the state. The state itself determines what qualifies as highly qualified and high and challenging. Schools are also required to allow military recruiters to have access to students' contact information. The effects of No Child Left Behind are hotly debated, but there is no denying what has taken place since it was implemented in 2003. Standardized tests for reading and math are given every year, grades 3 through 8, and at least once during high school. 9-year-olds now have the best reading scores since school reporting began in 1971, and scores in all categories have either improved or held steady in 43 states. One potential negative effect of the Act is a phenomenon called teaching to the test. This is a teaching practice where the instructor only teaches the class a narrow subset of skills that the instructor believes will be tested, rather than delving into the full breadth and depth of the curriculum. There have already been clear examples of this phenomenon manifesting itself in students' test results.
Although many people argue against it, there are many positive aspects of standardized testing. One main argument against standardized testing is that it forces teachers to, quote, teach to the test. However, this can be a good thing. It allows teachers to focus on essential content and skills, instead of wasting time on unnecessary activities that don't provide educational enrichment. Standardized tests also provide a lot of useful information in a short amount of time and for little cost. On average, standardized tests only take about an hour to administer and cost the average student only about $6. These tests provide equal content and testing conditions to all students, preventing anyone from being discriminated against. Former Washington, D.C. Schools Chancellor Michelle Rhee argues that using alternate tests for minorities or exempting children with disabilities would be unfair to those students. She says, quote, "You can't separate them, and trying to do so creates two unequal systems, one with accountability and one without it. This is a civil rights issue." End quote. Furthermore, standardized tests are beneficial because they are impartial. They are graded by computers and are therefore not subject to individual teachers' subjective scoring. If these tests were not graded electronically, policymakers would have to rely on scores created by individual schools and teachers who are invested in producing positive results. Physicians, lawyers, real estate brokers, and pilots all take standardized tests to ensure that they have the necessary knowledge for their professions. For standardized tests to be used in such high-profile and widespread professions such as these shows that they can be a reliable and beneficial evaluation of skills and knowledge.
Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. This quote by Albert Einstein summarizes one of the main points brought to the public's attention by opponents of standardized testing. Is it possible to measure a student's understanding of all of the material he or she learns throughout the year by just math and reading scores? The Bush administration's No Child Left Behind Act continues to test students' progress solely based upon their math and reading scores on state standardized tests, therefore narrowing the curriculum in schools across the country. A study performed in 2007 by the National Center on Education Policy reported that since 2001, 44% of school districts had reduced time spent on the humanities, such as sciences, social studies, and the arts, by an average of 145 minutes per week. Standardized tests can only measure a small portion of what makes education meaningful. The late education researcher Gerald W. Bracey listed the qualities that cannot be represented through standardized testing as resilience, motivation, persistence, curiosity, endurance, self-awareness, leadership, integrity, and many more.
Sean, let's bring you into this. Do you think that there's too much emphasis on this one-star test, and then when students get into high school and the high school exit exam, and if too much is riding on one test, there's also this concept of teaching to the test, or children being just shuttled in one direction because of these tests?
I think you have to distinguish between the content of the test and how the test results are used. And so I think by and large, in terms of the content of the test, they cover the kind of skills that we'd like students to know in academic areas. But I think there's a lot of other things that we would like schooling to do for children. Help them learn how to become productive members of a democratic society, how to understand different points of view, how to be tolerant, how to be moral, how to be creative, how to be artistic, in addition to learning math and English skills and whatnot. And so part of my concern with the test is not the tests we give, but the tests we don't give in some sense, the areas that aren't covered and therefore get sort of short shrift in the curriculum.
Some school systems have even decreased time spent in recess in response to the pressure to perform well on standardized tests. For children, especially of the elementary school age, this lowered level of physical activity throughout the day can have a negative impact on their emotional, intellectual, and social growth. Vital instruction time is being consumed by test preparation, with schools dedicating more than a quarter of the year's instruction to standardized test practice. The test can also bring extreme stress and anxiety to young students, having negative consequences on their health. According to the Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, the United States went from 18th in the world in math in 2002 to 31st in 2009, with a similar decline in science scores. The lowering of scores displays that standardized testing is not improving student achievement in the United States.
We know that we can test what is taught. But should what is taught be the test? We assess, of course, but how? In what way? As we believe with standardized tests? Or are we simply transforming education into someone else's feverish, complicated nightmare? Think about it, and then ask yourself, is this the proper course in this country? In this world? For then you would live instead in the testing zone.